cheesecakes and giant bongs. Ricky Lake and Howie Long. Giant boobies, firm and strong.
Not here.
Only in the USA. Hey, come on home today.
All right, thank you for tuning in. This is Politerotica, and we're going to be talking about Family Guy today. So I don't know if that's going to be interesting to you, but if you are so inclined, continue watching. So Seth MacFarlane is a very interesting person, and we will reveal in this video a very compelling player in political campaign and corporate donations. Seth was raised in a small town in Kent, Connecticut, and has been drawing cartoons at an extraordinary rate since about age 2 years old. At age 7, he actually used an 8mm camera to create animations, and by age 9 had his first job drawing cartoon satire at the local paper for $5 each, later graduating from the Rhode Island School of Design, where he discovered his love for stand-up comedy and voice acting. Later actually getting hired by Hanna-Barbera of all places as his first job, and worked on a cult classic called Johnny Bravo. The Life of Larry was a short created at this time that had caught the eye of Fox executives. They had offered 20-something-year-old Seth a deal for about $50,000 to shoot what was called Family Guy.
Is it'll be the kind of show where you can tune in and you won't know what to expect.
Family Guy is about the life of the Griffin clan.
They're coming from such radically different directions, each one of them.
Promise me, Peter.
It's headed up by a politically incorrect
Drop
pop.
of alcohol is going to touch these lips tonight. Hey, who wants to play Drink the Beer? Right here.
Sort of an animated Archie Bunker.
All right.
The hot new take on the nuclear American family. We know this, so there's not much to talk about there. So Fox sniffs out some cheap labor and makes a deal with 20-year-old Seth. Family Guy is hyped to air on the all-time best time slot of the decade, which is Super Bowl 1999, and here we are. We all know Family Guy fundamentally changed after cancellation, and then, of course, subsequently after 2010, when Seth MacFarlane began writing other things and lending more of a hand to American Dad and the shows and TV that were coming out, and Ted, etc. So the politics has changed as well, but we are saving that for, I guess, later in the video or maybe a next video. I don't know. So let's talk about the creator of this show. The politics of Seth as a person and as a creator, and how it influences this program, and then, I guess, me. So, to begin, Reaganomics has had a fundamental effect on America. So it shows its head in American Dad, but we are talking about Family Guy right now, so, well, that's where we are. We're talking about Family Guy, not American Dad. So, on the grounds of politics, what we do, if you know what I mean, you and I, and because we're not donors or elected people or people that have a lot of money, what we do and what we think matters, because we vote and we vote for where the money goes and how it's used, etc. The notion and motif of uninformed or lazy intellectualism is a great way to talk about these issues, and that is basically what Family Guy is. Not saying that it is lazy intellectualism, it is talking about and replicating and parodying lazy intellectualism. So Seth represents progressive values in his work in many ways. There is a difference between being a squeaky clean, perfect PC person like Mr. PC Principal. This can mean different things to different people. Of course, we've talked about this before. I would count myself as a politically correct person, but for some, simply laughing at the jokes in this program, or along what is going to be a 30-minute defense of them, I guess that could be a little bit too far, or maybe you could get kicked out of the politically correct fandom. The politics of Seth are very clear in Brian, and in a lot of the general work that comes from Family Guy, American Dad, etc. Money in politics is the central idea of a lot of progressive values, income inequality, social issues, etc. The one thing that anyone can do to influence these things other than voting is to donate or influence politics with money.
I am a capitalist. I like eating at Sugarfish. I like drinking Fiji water. I like going on Amazon.com on my phone and then sitting up 2 hours later and $6,000 later with a stack of Blu-rays, a box of Cadbury cream eggs, and a trombone waiting for me at my front door. But doesn't it seem that things have swung so far in one direction, with the top 1% of the country controlling more wealth than the other 99% combined, that just a little bit of democratic socialism maybe is not the worst idea?
Money. And we've been talking about fighting against that, but like I said, there's also ways to combat that in positive ways, like donating to good things. He has become a big-time financial backer for presidential campaigns to small congressional races in all the way back dating to 2008 to now. So starting out donating a sizable amount to the Obama administration in 2008 while they were still, I guess, campaigning. So I guess not the Obama administration, the Obama campaign in 2008. And then Fuzzy Door Production donates $2.5 million to Democrats in 2018, about 10 years later. So after an incident where Tucker Carlson, our good friend, talks smack about a NPR affiliate, Seth actually donates $500,000 to KPCC Radio just to spice things up a little bit and just to ruffle Tucker's panties a little bit, making small dollar donations to Bernie's campaign in both 2016 all the way to 2020, and of course encouraging staff and his friends and peers to do so as well. Lofgren Victory. Sorry, excuse me, I'm having trouble. Lofgren Victory Fund helps Democratic congressional people running, much like how Justice Democrats and other organizations that we talk about on this channel and other left tubers talk about as well. It's very similar organization to that. In a consistency not seen in Brian himself, Seth has fought for the same fundamental ideas, that is, reforming of economic inequality. Even in the first few episodes of Family Guy, kind of touch on the fragility of the modern nuclear patriarch, where Peter loses his job and then they end up on welfare and then hilarity ensues. So they were talking about these issues very early on, whether or not we stray from them. It's something that the creator advocates for in his personal time, and also it bleeds into the work that they create. Admits all the funny, weird, crazy, unpolitically correct things.
And they said, la 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 la.
Back on now.
How could this have happened? How?
So common motifs. So common motifs in this show have a fair resemblance to plot significance, but also insight into the values of this creator. So one of my personal favorite additions to the offensive joke roster, oddly enough, is the consistent criticism of colonialism in New England. How the fact that the characters are even there kind of serves as an impact, and how that impact was received by Native America. We get these in gags of blatant violence against Native people in skits and cutaway gags, etc. But this is not because I find this funny or the creator or the people writing these jokes are like, wow, I love to see this kind of violence against minorities. I love that this joke is being addressed. Oppressive colonial violence did happen, and it happened almost randomly and comedically towards Native people, and it's such a part of pop culture, and it's almost as American as apple pie. Asking someone to not make jokes like that is almost asking someone to not address it at all, and that's almost worse. Do you follow me? Of course, we wouldn't want these jokes to influence how people view Native American people, but I don't really think that's the intent, and I don't really think that's the result of these jokes in particular, because I relate to them. That's why I feel like I can speak to them. I don't know if you're following me, but the joke isn't the violence against the people, it's who's doing it and why.
We're gonna build a new settlement. We'll have a happy new life, and we'll have equal rights for all. Except blacks, Asians, Hispanics, Jews, gays, women, Muslims. Everybody who's not a white man. And I mean white. So no Italians, no Polish, just people from Ireland, England, and Scotland. But only certain parts of Scotland and Ireland. Just full-blooded whites. No, you know what? Not even whites. Nobody gets any rights. America.
So, okay, let's explain. The idea behind a bad joke or a rude joke or an offensive joke, etc. A good joke or a well-intentioned one will have a clear antagonist or an opposing idea. In these three cases, or I guess in these cases of a Native American joke, for example, Family Guy would write a gag that hints some old world event or gag that results in some cowboys killing the Indian or something to that effect that results in some sort of violence. Now, to the normal eye, this is like, whoa, why would you joke about that? That happened for real. And yeah, it did. Now you're thinking about it. Now you're thinking about how that's not right. And the antagonist of the joke is the colonial idea that violence against Native people, not the person or show telling the joke that to get the laugh, if you know what I mean. Now it all depends on the execution. Some, if not all, of these well-intentioned raunchy jokes fall completely flat because they're written in a small pool of writers that don't really fully understand the impact that they're trying to make, regardless of the well intentions. If Family Guy airs a long enough, for me to write for it, I promise I'll fix it. The colonial motif extends further than the clear Native American trope, but into the government, the town's iconography, the common back in time episodes taking place in literal colonial USA. This is because Rhode Island and New England in particular have a very, very, okay, so have you ever wondered why New England is called New England? Ever wonder why it got its name? This is the New World. It is literally, in all its clammy glory, colonialism and white supremacy, I guess. It's you know what I mean when I'm saying that. So we explore more artistic and literary motifs in Seth's version or vision of Family Guy, and not just the extension of writers that make up the show and what it is. Everyone has their own collective view of what these characters should be, but this is just my personal analysis. So maybe you may be familiar with the painting of modern artist M.C. Escher. I like to call it Crazy Stairs. So even in my art history class, I like to call it Crazy Stairs. So walking up the stairs and walking down the stairs and walking... Okay, so you get it. So M.C. Escher's work has always reminded me of a quote from the Family Guy's behind the scenes episode, where Seth talks about that you can't do the things that they do in Family Guy and that they do in South Park and even extension The Simpsons in real life, because it's just it would break the creativity of it. It would break the offensivity of it. It would be like way too harsh. That Family Guy can't exist in real life. It's just the art exists only in the confines of a cartoon, and in my opinion, that M.C. Escher paints and creates worlds that only exist in art. Of course, I mean, because they do only exist in art fundamentally, but the way in which they're drawn is just so creative and weird and different, and it opened up a whole nother medium of artists to be able to break the confines of physical reality, like time traveling and going up his stairs and going down the stairs and going up the sideways stairs. And calling back to this particular painting struck me as a common trope in the work of the reality being artistically I guess like referencing fiction and blah, 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 sci-fi bullshit artist garbage. So anyways, every single time that there is a painting in a TV show or a movie or anything in the background, or if it's referenced or talked about, you can read that painting and that painting means something to the plot, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And that's the beauty of taking an art history class, my friends. So you get to learn how to read a painting. It's a very useless skill. I have no job.
His economic policies made sense. If you're in the 50s, if you owned the local drugstore, you owned the local grocery store in your town, you were one of the wealthy people. You were one of the rich people in town. If you owned the local laundromat, you were one of the wealthy people. It made sense to vote for economic policies like what John McCain is proposing. Nowadays, decades later, what has happened is exactly what people like Mark Twain and H.G. Wells predicted. Everything's gone like this. So you have the very, very rich controlling half the wealth, the 1% of the wealthiest people in this country controlling half the wealth. The other 99% control the other half. That's a huge imbalance, and the middle class is vanishing. And by the way, this is what they call trickle-down economics, and I'm sure many of you have read about that. Started in the 80s under Reagan, and the idea is that if you give the rich a tax break, make them richer, then it'll trickle down to the rest of the economy, and everyone benefits. Now, what they aren't taking into account is the psychology of what happens when you get a lot of money. You start to get accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and you start to be extra cautious about preserving that at all costs. And it's a thing that you sort of have to fight. So that means that even if the rich get a tax break, if the rest of the economy is in the toilet, they're still going to hold on to that money because it's cold out there. So that policy just doesn't work. Now, Barack's idea...
So in the world of Family Guy, or The Simpsons, or animation as a whole, it gives us the ability to explore endless universes and realities that may or may not represent our own. The term Black Mirror or Twilight Zone is another motif that Family Guy, I believe, kind of intentionally uses, because I believe it would be better illustrated if the presence of death continued in the early episodes of Family Guy. I don't know if you remember the character of Death, but the presence of death added a fantasy element to the reality of the Griffin universe and lent a level of mortality to the world that only animation can really allow. And I feel like they really extended that with Roger being from a whole nother universe, just kind of changes that. And Stewie keeps a lot of that early sentimentality of sci-fi tropes that I guess Seth MacFarlane has admitted that he grew up watching and is literally parodying right now and making a profit off of. Family Guy is a Black Mirror. If you are looking into a different world where sometimes these characters represent themselves on a face value, like Peter is Peter and Lois is Lois, and others, they represent a greater narrative, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Sometimes a chicken fight is just a chicken fight, or a Conway Twitty joke is just meant to take up time because they wanted to cut the episode a little bit earlier, but sometimes these characters are meant to represent certain types of injustice, or characters that act in ways that are unappealing, are actually strategic critiques of our own world, our politics, or just how we watch TV. But with Star Trek, I feel like the influence is very, very, very clear in Family Guy and how the sequential episodes are written in a way where they are not meant to be every single character at every single time. Like sometimes each character in the ship is supposed to represent a different part of humanity or a different part of pop culture or a different idea. They're not always just supposed to be who they're written to be. So Star Trek's non-episodic nature is a clear and, I guess, impersonation of how the modern animated comedy plays out nowadays. That's not by accident. I think it's the proper way to write a animated comedy. There's so many out there that just try a little bit too hard to have this overarching story, And personally, I think the one that has done it the best over the last few years was South Park with their PC arc.
Not disrespect strong woman by talking when she's talking!
You really think I couldn't have handled that myself?
Oh, I was just making sure everything was...
You really had to grab the mic out of my hand like that?
Shit, I mean, no, sorry, I'm not... Oh, here you go.
That was beautiful. It was the best way to meld a overarching story with individualized stories, with the adults having their own B-plot and the kids kind of having their own coherent thing going on, and then it kind of switching and then going the other way. They lost it a little bit near the end, but they were really, really getting some good organized storytelling out there, and I believe, like, a lot of that comes from how Star Trek was created and how the stories were told back in that time. So oddly enough, it's a perfect way to tell a comedy story time with elements that may not be on their surface funny. And in Family Guy's case, it's often blatantly offensive. So it's a great way to not commit to a plot sequence and being able to tell a variety of stories week to week without having to keep thinking about what is the next big twist going to be.
That's right, until we're syndicated, Fox will never let us die. Please, we're off on the road to Rhode Island, the home of that old campus swing.
I talk about the politics of Family Guy without talking about Brian is, like, silly. So Brian, for the most part, is the political voice of the show, good or bad. Brian is a bad Democrat. He is a turncoat. Brian does nothing but undercut his own values and use those same values when convenient to literally lord his ideas over people around him, or just jumping on political bandwagons just because principle, or to appear oppressive, or to literally get money, or to have sex with a woman. Brian is the exact example of all the bad liberals in the world, and all the bad Democrats, and all the bad people. And the damage that they do and have done. Brian is correct in a lot of what he says and what he does, but he as a person and what he is doing to say these words is so hollow and meaningless, and it's almost as hollow and meaningless as Peter's actions. Peter is an allegory for, I guess, the average American low information citizen. In the beginning of the show, he has evolved a lot more, or I guess devolved is a more of a proper word. So other episodes, he is still representing the blue-collar America. Peter's character is not meant to be really read into in the same way that Brian's is, so Peter is and was always kind of written to be a mindless, selfish, buffoon, to execute jokes. There's not really an in-depth analysis of the right. He is just, Americans, and there's not really much to read into there. Stewie is not really, in my view, a factor in this conversation as much as I love his ability to execute homosexuality even as a cartoon baby. He has become a norm. I guess not he. His type of character has become kind of a norm in TV shows after giving stage to an openly hilarious and sometimes easily offensive on-screen gay characters. I think that's important. Representation, even in the weirdest ways, is important. To make people uncomfortable with homosexuality is wrong, you can never go too far. So if someone who's a bigot is watching this and is like, oh, I do not like this gay baby, they need to suck it, because, well, Stewie is here, he's queer, and he's not going anywhere. So if I have not already made it painfully obvious, I have a real special connection with Family Guy, and I may be reading into it a little bit too much, but I can't tell you where it comes from or exactly what my fascination and dedication to this show has come from, but it's gone on my entire life. I feel as though I just truly understand who these characters are trying to be, and we have only really spoken about the soft-core politics of Family Guy for a few political episodes and jokes here and there, but Family Guy as a whole, And the comedy as a whole, the characters and the world are very, very special to me. Quahog is like a second home to me. I feel like I just walk in there and their lines just come to life. I guess I've wanted to just go there and see what everyone's doing and bother everybody.
But one thing we do have in common is the glittering jewel that is New England. Like many of you, I hail from this great region, Connecticut to be precise. And while I treasure my formative years in the land of chowder, lobster, and gonorrhea, I am here to tell you about the place I live now, the real world. There's no dress rehearsal, no take-home tests, no rough drafts. If you unconstitutionally wiretap people's phones, you will be taken down. If you shoot someone in the face with a shotgun, you'll reap the consequences. If you illegally invade a sovereign nation to secure oil interests and assuage a personal vendetta, you'll be reelected.
What I value most about Family Guy, other than the things we spoke about here, is the cutaway gag. Some hate it. I like it. I don't know why I like it. I just like the obscurity, the whang, the boom, the what. I like feeling something. You laugh, you cry. It's deep down you learned something. Something you might have not learned it today or tomorrow, but one day you'll wake up and you'll be sitting there and you're like, wow, that was awesome. So,
all right, we're done.
You think the language in the Second Amendment is clear enough? You know, about the right to bear arms?
Of course it's clear. Every American has the right to hang a pair of bear arms on their wall. How could that possibly be misconstrued?
There is no just cause for an invasion of Iraq.
Well, that may be. But what we're all forgetting is anyone who doesn't want to go to war is gay.
I want to go to war.
Oh, yes, we should definitely go.
I was the first one who wanted to go to war.
A lot of people don't appreciate the cutaway gag. And I, for one, I do. So what I love about it is it's being able to feel the creativity flow from the writer's room, or the jokes told behind closed doors that make people laugh, and then they end up in the bit. It's kind of magical. I just like hearing and seeing that absurdity. My days as a teenager, I know that my sense of humor will come back to haunt me. I have made jokes that today's day and age would totally, oh my god, they would get me canceled. But the beauty of this is I have an excuse. It's because Family Guy made me this way. And I'm sure a lot of other teenagers and Zoomers and millennials feel the same way about that. So FCC censorship is the final point that we're going to be talking about when addressing this show as an entirety. Often this show faces censorship. In the beginning, it faced it a lot more than it does now. So the ability for a show to pull enough ratings and to sell enough merch to be able to bypass government regulation is not a new thing. The Simpsons was able to do that. But by the time that I was able, and a lot of the people that grew up with this show as opposed to the other shows in that roster, didn't really get to see that worldwide phenomenon. It was something that was in the past. By the time I was watching Family Guy, The Simpsons was already kind of old news. People weren't watching that. People weren't wearing Bart Simpson things or having that kind of stuff. It was already kind of, we were on to the next big thing, and that next big thing was trying to be, at least it was marketed to us as Family Guy. So the ability for a show to do this again was interesting, because The Simpsons had already done it, but they're doing it again, and Fox is able to market yet another TV show to the same demographic in the exact same way, and we ate it up like we didn't know any better. So okay, hear me out. Shows like this were able to push buttons and get smart and get swifty, so Rick and Morty would never really exist without shows like Simpsons or Family Guy. Creatively, I mean the way that we watch TV, and also the way that TV influences the law. So it used to be that it was like literally illegal to make the kinds of jokes that they do on Family Guy and The Simpsons and all these shows, but now you can do it, so that's great. You can thank them for that. So the brand Family Guy and The Simpsons embody two separate brands. Simpsons has had an aesthetic that embodies Americana and pop culture as a whole all over the world, and it has done so, like I mentioned, for some time by the time that Family Guy had already become a somewhat pseudo-phenomenon. Family Guy is more of like a fashion statement made by frat boys and 10-year-old boys, and I guess me. When Family Guy was new and exciting, having memorabilia was like a badge of honor on the playground, much like I imagine it was for kids in the past with other shows, but this is literally what we were going through at the time. It's like the kid who wore Peter Griffin boxers and had like a skateboard with Bart Simpson on it and had pizza for lunch every day was the coolest kid in school, but now we know his parents just like literally didn't care about him at all. And that's kind of funny, but...
Oh my god! Was he just master?
Yes.
Oh my.
Do we rub his nose in it?
So, Family Guy, regardless of the FCC censorship, the violence in movies and the sex on TV continued, and content in Family Guy has become more verbally and visually offensive as the time has gone on, in a, I guess, cultural level, evading that censorship that they fought so hard against. And South Park chooses a different, but in my opinion, superior path to take on social commentary with a lot more articulate analyses, and they really know their audience. They know their audience, and they give them what they want before they even know they want it. They just give us what we want, and with Family Guy, we feel like we keep having to ask for what we want. And the project itself is more or less been abandoned as a whole and is just a shell of its former self. And that's sad for me. What Family Guy was, and I guess is standing for, is still doing the equivalent to Rick and Morty. But Rick and Morty is a Black Mirror to the modern American family as well. And they do that a lot more articulately. I've said the word articulately so many times, but they do it better. They have cutaway gags of all sorts of different dimension traveling. They reference the same pop culture commodities that we know so well, like Back to the Future and Star Wars and the Star Trek. They use the exact same episodic nature where there's like sometimes an overarching story, but each episode is meant to tell its own story. Each episode and each character is like its own analysis of the whatever critique the creators want to do that week. It's not like every single character is always themselves. So Rick and Morty does that in a lot better ways than Family Guy ever could. And that's hard to admit in a 30-minute video where I'm talking about how I like Family Guy. I personally do. You don't have to, okay?
My back is hurting from the chair I'm sitting on. Where's the Tylenol? If I lay down flat on the floor, it usually kind of fixes it.
The cult following isn't always going to be a trendy fashion statement or a worldwide phenomenon like The Simpsons or Rick and Morty, but it's a way to wear your sense of humor, or at least it was back in the day. The entire world needs to know that anyone who is walking by you, that, hey, I'm funny and I like funny things. And every single person has that own thing, I guess. But back in the day, that was the only way that you could tell other people, like, hey, I like offensive things. I'm offensive. Without going on and on about praise to a show that hardly gets any praise for anything, I genuinely have a special place in my heart for Family Guy. Each and every character has its own motives and a mind of their own, and I can hear their voices when I say these things. I love it. Maybe that's some sort of mental issue if you hear Peter Griffin's voice in your head constantly. So Peter is selfish, he is stupid, and he is a bad dad, and he's an American dad? He's an American dad? So, okay. Breaking too much. I feel like I've just been rambling on about crazy things. If you like videos like this, just continue to watch them, and have a spooky rest of your day. Tune in next week, or probably I'll upload this pretty right away, but we're going to be doing an in-depth analysis of every single political episode of Family Guy and why I like them and what we're going to be talking about at that video. If you're interested in watching stuff like that, then just click here. Goodbye.
Bed Bath & Beyond.
Oh, boy, I hope you stayed away from that Beyond section. Come home where you belong. Quahog is your home. Who wants to live in Korea? Their name sounds like gonorrhea. So Quagmire, please tell them see ya. Come on, come on, come on home. Quahog is your home.